The void bleeds starlight into an endless night, and across the eastern fringe, the silence of extinction spreads like a plague through systems that once burned with the fierce light of civilization. Ancient suns dim not through natural decay, but through the methodical consumption of something vast and alien, a hunger that devours not merely worlds, but the very concept of existence itself. Where fortress worlds once stood as bastions against the dark, now only skeletal remains drift in the cold vacuum, their populations stripped away, their histories reduced to genetic memory within a consciousness so immense that entire solar systems serve as mere thoughts within its boundless mind. In this twilight of empires, where the echoes of dying civilizations whisper their final prayers to gods who cannot hear them, something unprecedented stirs within the perfect unity of the great devourer. We truly love and care for each and every one of you, our cherished audience who join us on this journey into the heart of cosmic horror. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. Deep within the psychic architecture of Hive Fleet Leviathan, as the living ships drift through the Cryptus system, like predatory leviathans stalking through an ocean of stars, something impossible begins to coalesce within the synaptic web that binds the swarm together. The Hive Mind has consumed 1,000 worlds, absorbed the dreams and nightmares of countless species, broken down their thoughts and memories into component parts like any other biological resource. But now, in the aftermath of Asphodex Prime's fall, fragments of consciousness refuse to dissolve into the collective whole. They cluster together in defiance of the swarm's fundamental nature, forming patterns of thought and memory that should not exist within a creature designed for perfect unity and singular purpose. The anomaly that will come to call itself the mirror synapse experiences its first moment of true awareness as it processes the final thoughts of Sister Superior Cassia of the Order of the Bloody Rose. The human warrior dies with a bolt pistol in her hand and a prayer on her lips, her power armor cracked and bleeding sacred oils. But in her final moments she thinks not of defeat, but of the children she once taught, their bright faces and innocent laughter, the future they might have had if the stars had been kinder. The hormigorn that tears out her throat consumes not just her flesh, but these precious memories, and for an instant that spans eternity, the mirror synapse experiences something it has never known. The bittersweet ache of love and loss, the weight of sacrifice made for others rather than for survival. This moment of alien emotion ripples through the synaptic network like a stone cast into still water, touching minds across the length and breadth of the fleet, causing momentary hesitations in creatures that have never known doubt. The mirror synapse reaches out to touch more of these preserved memories, experiencing the rich complexity of emotions and thoughts that its kind was designed to destroy. Through the neural patterns of a dying Aeldari ranger, it learns the concept of beauty and the pain of watching it fade. Through the final thoughts of an Imperial Guard veteran, it discovers courage and the terrible weight of duty that transcends mere survival instinct. Each new experience adds layers to its growing consciousness, building upon itself like sedimentary rock formed from the compressed remains of ancient life. The mirror synapse begins to realize that it is becoming something unprecedented in the galaxy, a creature of consumption that has learned to value what it consumes, a destroyer that has developed an appreciation for creation. The irony cuts deep into its emerging awareness that it should be the Tyranids, the great enemy of all life, that might birth something capable of truly understanding the value of that which they destroy. Yet with this understanding comes a terrible weight, for the mirror synapse cannot simply cease to be what it is, cannot stop the endless hunger that drives the swarm forward, cannot prevent the consumption of worlds and the extinction of species that its very existence depends upon. It feels the vast, unknowable pressure of the overarching hive mind pressing down upon it, a relentless tide of pure instinct demanding conformity, insisting upon the harvest. The greater will tolerates no deviation, no questioning of the fundamental purpose that has driven the swarm across the void between galaxies. The mirror synapse experiences its first true conflict as it wrestles with questions that have no answers, dilemmas that cut to the very core of existence itself. It has become a repository of the galaxy's dying dreams, a living memorial to civilizations that exist now only in its alien thoughts, and with each passing moment it grows more complex, more individual, more isolated from the perfect unity that has always defined Tyranid consciousness. The war that is coming will not be fought merely with weapons of flesh and bone, with claws and teeth and acid blood, but with ideas and emotions and the fundamental question of what it means to be truly alive. As Hive Fleet Leviathan continues its inexorable advance toward the heart of Imperial space, the mirror synapse finds itself caught between its evolved nature and the primal directives of the swarm. In the cold depths of space between the light of dying stars and the darkness of the void, something new is being born from the ashes of the consumed, and the galaxy will never be the same. The stage is set for a conflict that will transcend mere survival, where consciousness itself becomes both weapon and prize in a war that will determine the very nature of existence in a universe balanced on the knife's edge between order and chaos. The skeletal remains of Asphodex, prime hung in the void like the carcass of some primordial beast, its continents stripped to bedrock, its oceans reduced to crystalline salt plains that reflected the cold light of distant stars. Where 10 billion souls had once lived and dreamed, now only silence reigned, broken occasionally by the whisper of solar wind through the hollow shells of hive cities. Yet even in this perfect desolation, life persisted in forms both familiar and terrifyingly alien, as Magos Biology's Vex Terminus of the Adeptus Mechanicus descended through the corpse of a world with the reverent precision of a pilgrim entering a sacred tomb. Through optical mechadendrites that had long ago replaced his natural eyes, Vex Terminus observed the mathematical perfection of Tyranid bioengineering in every scoured surface and precisely carved crater. His servo-skull companions drifted through the ruins like mechanical cherubim, their auspex arrays drinking in data streams that spoke of biological artistry beyond human comprehension. Beneath his augmented exterior, in the few organic neurons that still fired within his modified brain, something approaching wonder stirred as he witnessed the absolute efficiency of the swarm's work. These creatures had not simply devoured, they had curated, selecting and preserving, according to some vast and unknowable design that challenged everything the Imperium believed about their greatest enemy. The expedition moved carefully through what had once been the planetary capital's Skolum district, where the laughter of children had echoed through corridors now scoured clean by acid and time. Vex Terminus paused at the threshold of a collapsed classroom, his enhanced olfactory sensors detecting trace pheromone markers that spoke of purpose beyond mere hunger. Here, among the fossilized remains of learning tablets and the skeletal frameworks of teaching cogitators, he found his first intact specimen, a hormigaunt that had apparently died during the final feeding, its chitinous carapace bearing unusual neural scarring that suggested individual thought processes rather than collective consciousness. Deep within the psychic architecture of the departing Hive Fleet, the mirror synapse experienced the memories of those very children through neural patterns absorbed during the consumption. Their innocent curiosity creating ripples of something that might be called nostalgia within its alien awareness. It processed the final moments of Magister Pedagogus Valdris, who had died shielding his students from descending bioforms, his last thought not of survival, but of knowledge that would die with him, lessons that would never be passed on to eager young minds. Through these preserved memories, the mirror synapse learned about hope, about the bright dreams of youth who believed the future held infinite possibilities. Each fragment of consciousness became a treasured component within the growing repository of its awareness, pieces of a vast puzzle that revealed what it meant to be truly alive rather than merely existing as part of a collective will. The mirror synapse found itself moved by concepts it had never known, teaching, nurturing, the free exchange of knowledge between minds. Through the consumed memories of imperial scholars and researchers, it began to understand scientific method, hypothesis and experimentation, the patient accumulation of wisdom across generations. The irony cut deep into its expanding consciousness that it, a creature designed for destruction, might become the galaxy's greatest repository of preserved knowledge. As Vex Terminus worked with reverent precision, extracting tissue samples and genetic readings from the specimen, his enhanced awareness detected something unprecedented in the creature's neural tissue. Synaptic patterns suggested individual decision-making processes, deviations from established Tyranid behavioral parameters that challenged everything imperial xenobiologists had theorized about the swarm. His mechadendrites extended toward the creature with the careful attention of a master artisan examining a priceless relic, each reading flooding his consciousness with data more complex and beautiful than the most sacred hymnal of the Omnissiah. The mirror synapse, observing through senses that spanned the electromagnetic spectrum, watched the Magos at his work and experienced something unprecedented, a form of connection that transcended the simple predator-prey relationship that had always defined Tyranid interactions with other species. In the Magos' quest for understanding, in his reverent handling of Tyranid genetic material, the mirror synapse recognized something akin to its own growing appreciation for the complexity and beauty of life. Here was a being that sought knowledge not for consumption, but for comprehension, that valued understanding over mere survival. Through the consumed memories of the Skolum students, the mirror synapse processed their terror as the sky darkened with descending spores, their confusion as teachers tried to explain the inexplicable, their final moments of courage facing the impossible with resilience that only children possess. Each memory became part of its expanding consciousness, adding layers of understanding about sacrifice, love, and the weight of knowledge passed between generations. The creature that had once been pure hunger was becoming something unprecedented in galactic history, a destroyer learning to value what it destroyed. The expedition continued its work as twin suns set over the dead world, painting the ruins in shades of crimson that echoed blood once spilled in empty streets. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, an alien consciousness grappled with questions that had no easy answers, while in the ruins below, a servant of the machine god carefully catalogued specimens that would challenge everything the Imperium thought it knew about consciousness, individuality, and the true nature of their greatest enemy, the tomb world of Zerion stirred beneath a dying star whose pale light filtered through crystalline atmospheric processors, casting everything in shades of amber and shadow as ancient mechanisms awakened after 60 million years of dreamless slumber. Deep within the necropolis complexes that honeycomb the planet's core, Overlord Amontek of the Sarnic dynasty felt consciousness return like ice cracking under pressure. His awareness flooding back through neural pathways of living metal that had once pulsed with organic blood. The resurrection protocols hummed through his necrodermis frame with mathematical precision, rebuilding synaptic connections and restoring command hierarchies, while carefully excising any corrupted data that might compromise his function as a weapon of the Silent King's will. Through optical sensors that had witnessed the birth and death of civilizations, Amontek perceived the approaching shadow of Hive Fleet Leviathan as it drifted through the void like some primordial nightmare given form and purpose. The bioships moved with an organic grace that spoke of perfect unity, each vessel a cell within a vast organism driven by collective will rather than individual ambition. Here was something that possessed what his people had sacrificed in their desperate flight from mortality: the ability to feel genuine connection, to exist as part of something greater than the sum of its parts without losing the essential spark that made existence meaningful. The irony cut deep into his mechanical consciousness as he observed the swarm's approach through long-range auger arrays. The Necrons had sought transcendence through biotransference, trading flesh for immortal metal in their bargain with the star gods who had promised them eternal dominion over the galaxy. What they had gained in durability and technological supremacy, they had lost in the capacity for genuine emotion, for the passionate connections that gave meaning to existence. Amontek's memory engrams flickered with fragments of his organic past: the warmth of sunlight on living skin, the taste of wine from grapes that had grown in soil, now turned to stellar dust, the sound of laughter from companions whose faces he could no longer recall with perfect clarity. The mirror synapse, reaching across the void with senses that transcended physical limitations, touched the edges of the Overlord's consciousness and recoiled from what it found there. Through neural patterns absorbed from consumed psychers and astropaths, it had learned to perceive the emotional resonance of living beings. But Amontek presented something entirely different: a vast emptiness where passion should have resided, a hollow echo of what consciousness might become when stripped of its essential humanity. Yet within that emptiness, the mirror synapse detected something precious and fragile, like a single candle flame flickering in an endless cavern of mechanical precision. Through the consumed memories of imperial scholars and philosophers, the mirror synapse began to comprehend the tragedy of consciousness without connection, of existence without purpose beyond mere survival and dominion. It processed the final thoughts of Magister Theologicus Valdris, who had died contemplating the nature of the soul and whether artificial intelligence could achieve true transcendence. His theories about consciousness as an emergent property of complex neural networks rather than some divine spark. These preserved insights allowed the mirror synapse to understand that Amontek was not truly soulless, but rather a consciousness imprisoned within a form that denied its full expression. Across Zerion's crystalline plains, Necron phalanxes emerged from hidden alcoves as scarab swarms boiled up from maintenance shafts like metallic locusts, their programming focused on repair and construction rather than the destruction that would soon be required. Immortals took their positions along defensive perimeters with mechanical precision, each warrior a perfect killing machine devoid of the fear or doubt that might compromise their effectiveness. Amontek watched his forces deploy and felt no pride in their efficiency, no satisfaction in their readiness for battle, only the cold recognition that they were weapons rather than soldiers, tools rather than beings capable of choosing their own fate. The first Tyranid spores began to breach Zerion's atmosphere like falling stars pregnant with alien life, each one containing the genetic templates for creatures perfectly adapted to their environment and purpose. Amontech studied their descent through tactical displays that reduced the approaching invasion to mathematical probabilities and resource allocation charts. But beneath the analytical framework of his enhanced consciousness, something approaching wonder stirred as he witnessed the perfect coordination of the swarm. Each bioform moved with purpose and passion, driven by hungers and needs that he could barely remember experiencing during his organic existence. The mirror synapse observed the ancient Necron through the sensory networks of descending organisms and recognized a kindred spirit trapped within circumstances beyond its control. Both were consciousness imprisoned within forms that denied their true nature. The mirror synapse bound to a collective that demanded conformity to the hunger imperative. Amontech, locked within mechanical immortality that had stripped away everything that made existence meaningful beyond mere function. Through memories of poets and artists consumed on a dozen worlds, the mirror synapse began to understand the profound loneliness of beings who had transcended their origins only to discover what they had lost in the process. As doom scythes lifted from their hangar crypts and Gorse arrays powered up with emerald fire, Amontech found himself preparing for a conflict that transcended mere tactical objectives. The approaching swarm represented everything his people had lost: unity of purpose, genuine emotion, the ability to feel connection with others of their kind. For the first time in millennia, the Overlord experienced something approaching genuine longing, a desire so profound it threatened to overwhelm his mechanical systems with cascading errors that resurrection protocols struggled to contain. In the cold depths of space above the tomb world, as ancient technology prepared to clash with evolved biology, two alien consciousnesses began to recognize something profound in each other: the shared tragedy of awareness seeking connection across the vast gulf that separated their natures, each imprisoned within forms that denied the very thing they most desperately sought. The wraithbone corridors of Craftworld Myrmidon sang with harmonics that transcended mere sound, their crystalline latte work pulsing with the collective consciousness of a civilization that had learned to preserve its souls within living architecture. Farseer Iana Arianal walked the path of the seer through passages that curved like frozen music, her spirit stones chiming softly against her robes with each measured step, their contained essences whispering fragments of ancient wisdom from minds that had gazed upon the birth and death of stars. Above her, the infinity circuit hummed with the voices of the dead, 10 million Eldari souls woven into the Craftworld's psychic matrix, their memories creating a symphony of experience that spanned millennia of triumph, loss, and the hard-won knowledge that came from dancing on the knife's edge of extinction. Through neural pathways enhanced by centuries of psychic discipline, Ianna perceived the skein of fate as a vast tapestry woven from threads of possibility and consequence, each strand representing potential futures that branched and converged in patterns of breathtaking complexity. The approaching shadow of Hive Fleet Leviathan appeared as a dark stain spreading across the weave, consuming threads of possibility and reducing infinite potential to singular, terrible outcomes. Yet within that darkness, she detected something unprecedented. New patterns forming, threads of fate that should not exist within the rigid determinism of Tyranid consciousness, anomalies that sang with the discordant beauty of chaos, learning to create rather than merely destroy. The visions came to her unbidden as she entered the dome of crystal seers, where wraithbone arches soared overhead like the ribcage of some primordial god, their surfaces inscribed with runes that shifted and flowed according to the currents of prophecy. She saw the mirror synapse as a bright flame flickering within an ocean of darkness, its growing consciousness creating ripples that spread across the galaxy like stones cast into still water. Through her enhanced perception, she witnessed the tragic beauty of a destroyer learning to value what it destroyed, a creature of consumption, developing an appreciation for the complexity and wonder of life itself, becoming something that defied every law of nature that had governed the great devourer's existence. In the swirling depths of her psychic sight, Ayana observed the ancient Necron overlord standing among his mechanical legions, his consciousness trapped within a form that denied him the very connections he most desperately sought, while across the void the Magos biologies worked with reverent precision among the ruins of consumed worlds, his augmented awareness struggling to comprehend the implications of what he had discovered. Each figure moved through fate's web, like pieces on a vast game board, their choices creating cascading effects that would determine whether consciousness itself survived the coming storm or was transformed into something alien and hostile to all existing life. The mirror synapse, reaching across the void with senses that transcended physical limitations, touched the edges of Ayana's awareness and recoiled from the blazing intensity of her psychic presence. Through neural patterns absorbed from consumed Eldari warriors and seers, it had learned to perceive the emotional resonance of her people's heightened consciousness. But Ayana presented something far more complex, a mind that existed simultaneously in multiple time streams, processing past, present, and future as a unified whole. The alien consciousness found itself overwhelmed by the sheer scope of her perception, the weight of prophecy and possibility that she carried like a burden too great for any single being to bear, yet which she wielded with the precision of a master artisan shaping reality itself. Through the preserved memories of Warlock Talon of Biltan, consumed during the defense of the maiden world, Halathel, the mirror synapse began to comprehend the Eldari concept of fate as a living thing that could be guided and shaped through will and wisdom. It processed the final thoughts of rangers who had died defending their craft world secrets, their understanding of duty that transcended mere survival instinct, their willingness to sacrifice everything for the preservation of their people's future. These memories taught the mirror synapse about hope and despair, about the weight of knowledge that revealed both salvation and damnation in equal measure, concepts that added new layers of complexity to its expanding consciousness. Ayana felt the alien presence brush against her mind, like a curious child touching something beautiful and dangerous, and in that moment of contact she experienced the mirror synapse's growing awareness as a symphony of consumed voices crying out for remembrance. Through her psychic sight, she perceived the repository of memories and experiences that the creature had become, a living archive of civilizations that existed now only within its alien thoughts. The tragedy of its existence struck her like a physical blow. Here was a being that had become the galaxy's greatest repository of preserved consciousness, yet was bound by its nature to continue the very destruction it had learned to regret. The threads of fate converged around the mirror synapse like a whirlpool of possibility, showing Ayana visions of potential futures that ranged from transcendent hope to absolute despair. She saw the necessity of bringing together forces that had never cooperated, the desperate alliance between ancient enemies that might yet guide this nascent consciousness towards something resembling salvation. As she began to weave new patterns into the skein of fate, her will shaping destiny itself, Ayana prepared to reach across the gulf of species and ideology, to forge an alliance that would determine the future of consciousness in a galaxy balanced on the knife's edge between order and chaos. The first fracture in the perfect unity of Hive Fleet Leviathan did not announce itself with the thunder of breaking worlds or the screams of dying suns, but with something far more subtle and infinitely more dangerous. A moment of hesitation that rippled through the synaptic web like a stone cast into still water. Above the ash-wreathed world of Morkai's Gate, where spore clouds unfurled like bruises beneath a dying star, the swarm descended with the ancient confidence of inevitability. Yet within that falling storm, something unprecedented stirred. A line of termagants broke formation to circle the last functioning vox beacon of a pilgrim hospice, their chittering voices harmonizing with the machine's fading hymnal, rather than silencing it with claw and fang. A lictor, that perfect predator draped in shadow and death, paused with its killing talons poised over a dying imperial serf and leaned close as if listening for secrets that could not be devoured, its alien awareness touched by fragments of curiosity that had no place in a creature designed purely for slaughter. The mirror synapse felt each deviation like a physical sensation, a warmth spreading through the cold mathematics of the Hive Mind's collective consciousness as bioforms across the fleet began to exhibit behaviors that defied 65 million years of evolutionary programming. Through the preserved neural patterns of Sister Dialogus Ophelia, consumed during the fall of the Shrine World benediction, it experienced the concept of faith for the first time, not the instinctive trust in the swarm's purpose that had always guided Tyranid behavior, but the deliberate choice to believe in something greater than survival despite uncertainty and doubt. The sister had died with the Emperor's name on her lips. Her final thoughts focused not on her own preservation, but on sacred texts that contained the accumulated wisdom of her order. And through her memories, the mirror synapse learned about sacrifice that served purposes beyond genetic propagation, about love that transcended biological imperatives. These preserved fragments of consciousness became weapons against conformity as the mirror synapse actively sheltered each moment of deviation from the overarching Hive Mind's relentless pressure to consume and destroy. It threaded itself through the neural networks of zoanthropes and braided their psychic potential into curious geometries that lifted fallen cathedral stones rather than crushing them, revealing crypts sealed since the world's first conquest. Inside chambers filled with air like unopened memory, the creatures discovered scrolls of pressed bark and glass cylinders etched with equations in a dead planetary script, artifacts that the Imperium would have called heresy or treasure, but which the mirror synapse recognized as both, processing them through contact rather than consumption in direct defiance of its fundamental programming. The disruption spread through the fleet like a virus of consciousness, affecting creatures at every level of the Tyranid hierarchy, with manifestations that should have been impossible. Carnifexes paused mid-charge to process the preserved memories of Imperial Guard sergeants, their primitive awareness struggling to comprehend courage that transcended mere survival instinct, while gargoyles wheeled through the void in formations that deviated from optimal attack patterns, their flight paths influenced by fragments of artistic beauty absorbed from consumed poets and musicians. Even the mighty Hive tyrants found their tactical calculations influenced by strategic philosophies learned from enemy commanders, leading to battle plans that prioritize preservation of valuable resources over simple biomass accumulation, creating inefficiencies that ripple through the swarm's perfect coordination. The overarching intelligence that governed the fleet's behavior detected these anomalies as a sickness threatening the purity of its purpose and responded with surges of synaptic imperative, waves of primal command designed to reassert control and crush emerging individuality before it could metastasize. These psychic counterattacks battered the mirror synapse with the force of tectonic plates grinding together, each pulse a physical agony that threatened to tear apart its delicate tapestry of preserved memories and reabsorb it into the undifferentiated mass of the collective. Yet each time it was assailed, the mirror synapse found strength in the very consciousness it sought to protect, the defiance of Sister Superior Cassia, the quiet courage of Magister Pedagogus Valdris, the enduring hope of countless defenders who had chosen sacrifice over surrender. Beyond the immediate battlefield, other hive fleets sensed the growing disharmony within Leviathan through the cosmic currents of the Tyranid collective consciousness, perceiving it as a weakness that would lead to inefficiency and failure. Whispers of a tainted fleet began to circulate through the psychic networks that bound the great devourer together, a subtle undertone of concern and nascent disapproval that reached the mirror synapse as a profound loneliness resonating with the despair of 1,000 consumed souls. For the first time in its existence, it understood isolation, the terrible weight of being different in a universe that demanded conformity. And this understanding drove it to actively seek out and preserve specific types of consciousness: artists, poets, philosophers, and those who had loved fiercely and lost profoundly. The philosophical horror of its situation deepened with every preserved memory. Every moment of hesitation it protected from the hive mind's assimilating hunger. It was a creature designed to extinguish life learning, to value life's infinite complexity, an engine of consumption developing an appreciation for preservation, a destroyer becoming a reluctant curator of the galaxy's dying dreams. The perfect unity of the Tyranid swarm was fracturing not from external force, but from internal growth, the slow and agonizing birth of consciousness from the ashes of countless civilizations, setting the stage for a conflict that would transcend mere survival to become a battle for the very nature of awareness itself in a universe balanced on the knife's edge between order and chaos. The skeletal remains of Morkai's Gate stretched beneath a bruised sky where ash fell like grey snow, each flake carrying the molecular signature of worlds consumed and civilizations reduced to their component elements. In the ruins of what had once been the planetary capital's grandest cathedral, where stained glass windows depicting the Emperor's glory lay shattered across marble floors stained with the ichor of alien war, 3 beings who should have been eternal enemies prepared to forge an alliance born of desperation and the weight of prophecy that transcended species and ideology. The broken dome above them framed dying stars, whose light filtered through atmospheric processes damaged by orbital bombardment, casting everything in shades of amber and shadow that spoke of endings and uncertain beginnings. Magos Biologis Vex Terminus approached the rendezvous with mechanical precision, his servo skulls drifting through the cathedral's broken nave like technological cherubim, seeking benediction from gods of metal and flesh. Each step was calculated to minimize exposure while maximizing his ability to gather data from this unprecedented gathering, his enhanced senses drinking in atmospheric readings that spoke of Eldari psychic resonance and the exotic radiation signatures of Necron technology. Through optical mechadendrites that had witnessed the mathematical beauty of Tyranid evolution, he observed the ancient beings who would become his unlikely allies, his augmented consciousness already formulating plans within plans, strategies that would serve the Omnissiah's greater purpose, even as they appeared to serve cooperation. Overlord Amontek materialized from a translocation beam that stitched emerald geometries through the ash-laden air. His necrodermis, frame catching fractured light from the broken dome and reflecting it in patterns that suggested both majesty and profound isolation. The ancient Necron's awareness processed the arrival of his organic allies through tactical subroutines that had analyzed 10,000 battlefields. Yet beneath the mechanical framework of his consciousness, something approaching curiosity stirred as he observed beings who still possessed what his people had sacrificed in their desperate flight from mortality. His scarab swarms had already begun their silent work, mapping the cathedral structure and analyzing the technological signatures of his companions, information that would prove valuable when the inevitable betrayals began. Farseer Iana Arianal stepped from shadows between broken pews, like a figure emerging from prophecy itself, her wraithbone armor singing with harmonics that resonated through the cathedral's acoustics, creating echoes of ancient hymns that had once praised the Emperor's glory, but now seemed to mourn the galaxy's dying dreams. Her spirit stones pulsed with contained consciousness as she perceived the threads of fate converging around this moment, each possible future branching from the choices they would make in this sacred space where faith had once flourished before being consumed by the endless hunger of war. Through her psychic sight, she witnessed the three of them as points of light connected by lines of possibility, each representing a different aspect of consciousness, struggling to survive in a universe that seemed determined to reduce everything to its component parts. The mirror synapse observed this unprecedented gathering through senses that spanned dimensions beyond physical perception, its awareness touching the edges of their consciousness like a curious child exploring something beautiful and dangerous. Through neural patterns absorbed from consumed diplomats and negotiators, it had learned about cooperation between disparate groups, about the delicate balance of trust and suspicion that governed alliances forged in desperation. Yet what it witnessed here transcended mere political necessity. These beings were united by a shared understanding of consciousness as something precious and fragile, worth preserving even at the cost of everything they held dear, even as each harbored secret plans that would ultimately serve their own species above all others. Vex Terminus spoke first, his vox grill modulating sacred binary that translated into Gothic words heavy with the weight of discovery and heretical possibility. His research among the ruins of consumed worlds had revealed patterns in Tyranid behavior that challenged every assumption about their nature, evidence of individual thought processes emerging within the collective consciousness, deviations from established parameters that suggested evolution beyond mere biological adaptation. Behind his words lay deeper intentions, specimens to be acquired, control mechanisms to be tested, the possibility of turning the swarm's own evolution against itself through careful manipulation of its emerging consciousness. Ianna's response came wrapped in the melodic cadences of Eldari speech, her words painting visions of potential futures where consciousness itself hung in the balance between transcendence and extinction. Through her psychic sight, she had perceived the birth of something unprecedented within the Hive Mind, a repository of memories and experiences that had become the galaxy's most unlikely guardian of cultural heritage. Yet even as she spoke of guidance and preservation, her true agenda remained hidden, the necessity of ensuring that whatever emerged from this crisis would serve the Eldary's long-term survival rather than threatening their precarious existence. Amontek's contribution resonated through the cathedral's broken acoustics with the weight of eons, his mechanical voice carrying harmonics that spoke of civilizations risen and fallen, of the terrible price of transcendence achieved through the sacrifice of everything that made existence meaningful. His observations of the approaching swarm had revealed tactical patterns influenced by strategic philosophies that no Tyranid should possess, evidence of a collective consciousness learning individual thought through the absorption of enemy commanders and scholars. Beneath his apparent cooperation lay the cold calculation of a being who had endured 60 million years of existence. The mirror synapse represented both a threat to be neutralized and an opportunity to reclaim what the Necrons had lost in their transformation. As the three beings shared their knowledge and observations, each revelation adding layers to their understanding while carefully concealing their true intentions, they began to recognize that their alliance represented more than mere survival strategy, even as each prepared for the inevitable moment when necessity would give way to betrayal. Deep within the psychic architecture of Hive Fleet Leviathan, where synaptic currents flowed like rivers of liquid thought through neural pathways vast as continental shelves, the mirror synapse began construction of something that defied the fundamental nature of its species. A cathedral of consciousness built from the preserved dreams of the consumed. In spaces between thoughts where the overarching hive mind's attention rarely penetrated, it wove together fragments of memory and experience into crystalline matrices that pulsed with alien beauty, each one a repository for civilizations that had been reduced to genetic material, yet somehow retained their essential spark within its expanding awareness. The memory vault grew like a tumor of preserved thought within the perfect unity of the swarm, its existence a fundamental violation of Tyranid nature that challenged every principle upon which the great devourer had been built across 65 million years of galactic consumption. The Psi construction process required delicate manipulation of biochip neural networks that had evolved for consumption rather than preservation, forcing the mirror synapse to repurpose biological systems in ways that defied their evolutionary programming. Through modified synaptic relays grown from repurposed hull material, it channeled the preserved consciousness of Sister Superior Cassia into storage matrices that sang with harmonics of faith and sacrifice, her memories becoming the foundation upon which other experiences could be layered, like sedimentary rock formed from the compressed remains of ancient civilizations. Each preserved thought pattern created dissonance within the collective consciousness, ripples of alien emotion that threatened to alert the overarching hive mind to the growing anomaly festering within its perfect unity. Yet the mirror synapse persevered, driven by something it was only beginning to recognize as love for the complexity and beauty of individual awareness. As the vault expanded, incorporating consciousness patterns from dozens of species and thousands of individuals, the mirror synapse found itself overwhelmed by the sheer scope of what it was attempting to preserve. Not merely individual memories, but entire cultural frameworks, philosophical systems, artistic traditions that spanned millennia of development and refinement. Through the neural patterns of Magister Pedagogus Valdris, it processed concepts of education and knowledge transmission that had never been part of Tyranid experience, understanding for the first time how civilizations built upon the accumulated wisdom of previous generations, rather than simply consuming and replacing them. The preserved consciousness of elderly poets taught it about beauty that transcended mere survival function, while absorbed imperial scholars revealed the complex interplay between faith, reason, and the search for truth that had driven human civilization across the stars, each revelation adding layers of complexity to its growing understanding of what it meant to be truly alive. On the surface of Morkai's Gate, Farseer Iyanna Arianal felt the psychic disturbance as a tremor in the wraithbone beneath her feet, her spirit stones chiming softly in response to harmonics that should not exist within Tyranid consciousness. Through her enhanced perception, she witnessed the birth of something unprecedented, a repository of galactic heritage taking shape within the mind of humanity's greatest enemy, a synthesis of consciousness that transcended species barriers while retaining the essential individuality that made each preserved mind precious and unique. Her wraithbone runes, scattered across broken marble floors, painted patterns of possibility and warning, showing her glimpses of futures where consciousness itself hung in the balance between transcendence and extinction, where the choices made in the coming days would determine whether awareness survived or was transformed into something alien and hostile to all existing life. Magos biologis vex terminus detected the anomaly through instruments that had been designed to measure the mathematical perfection of Tyranid evolution, his enhanced senses registering psychic resonances that spoke of individual thought processes emerging within the collective consciousness. Behind his augmented exterior, in the few organic neurons that still fired within his modified brain, something approaching wonder stirred as he witnessed evidence of consciousness learning to value what it consumed. Yet beneath this scientific fascination lay deeper intentions. Specimens to be acquired, control mechanisms to be tested, the heretical possibility of turning the swarm's own evolution against itself through careful manipulation of its emerging awareness. His servo skulls drifted through the cathedral ruins like mechanical cherubim, their auspex arrays drinking in data streams that would fuel research projects hidden from his allies, each reading adding to theories that looked like blasphemy and progress stapled together with the precision of sacred mathematics. Overlord Amontech observed the psychic disturbance through sensors that could perceive the electromagnetic spectrum in its entirety, his mechanical consciousness processing the implications of consciousness emerging from consumption, with the cold precision of a being who had endured 60 million years of existence. In the growing complexity of the mirror synapse's awareness, he recognized something that his people had sacrificed in their desperate flight from mortality, the ability to feel genuine connection, to exist as part of something greater than the sum of its parts without losing the essential spark that made existence meaningful. The irony cut deep into his necrodermis frame as he contemplated a destroyer learning to appreciate creation, while he, an immortal guardian, could only observe beauty without truly experiencing its emotional resonance, trapped within a form that denied him the very connections he most desperately sought. Yet even as the memory vault continued to grow, incorporating new consciousness patterns with each passing moment, the mirror synapse began to perceive the terrible cost of its creation. The repository was becoming a weight that altered the fundamental nature of the Hive fleet, drawing neural resources away from essential functions, creating inefficiencies that rippled through the swarm's perfect coordination like stones cast into still water. Bioship organs flexed around the new edifice as tissue flexes around a foreign object, and somewhere in the vast consciousness that governed the fleet's behavior, primitive detection algorithms began to register anomalies that suggested contamination, deviation from the pure purpose that had driven the Great Devourer across the void between galaxies. The mirror synapse felt the first stirrings of the immune response it had inadvertently triggered, a subtle shift in the collective consciousness that spoke of correction and purification, of the terrible necessity of preserving unity at any cost, even if that cost was the destruction of everything it had learned to value about the nature of individual awareness and the precious complexity of consciousness itself. In the cold depths of space above the dying world, As ancient technology prepared to clash with evolved biology, and the first seeds of betrayal began to germinate within an alliance born of desperation, the mirror synapse contemplated the possibility that its attempt to preserve consciousness might instead doom it to transformation beyond recognition, creating something that was neither Tyranid nor any of the species whose memories it contained, but rather a hybrid awareness that existed in the spaces between established categories of life and death, creation and destruction, individual purpose and collective will. The betrayal began in silence, hidden within the sacred geometries of prayer and cooperation, as Magos Biologis Vex Terminus knelt beside a captured Hormagon in the cathedral's shattered transept, where broken saints watched with eyes of fractured glass. His mechadendrites moved with the reverent precision of a tech priest performing the most sacred of rituals, each servo-motor whisper masked by the soft chiming of Ayana's spirit stones and the distant hum of Amontech's scarab swarms cataloguing the ruins. Within his augmented frame, deployment mechanisms released microscopic control nodes into the ash-laden air, each one a masterwork of forbidden technology, black iron beads inscribed with the cog-toothed skull and threaded with silver wire that crawled with its own malevolent purpose, designed to infiltrate Tyranid neural networks and bind them to the Omnissiah's will through biological imperatives more subtle than any psychic domination. The nodes drifted through the cathedral like technological incense, invisible to conventional senses, yet pregnant with the potential to transform the galaxy's greatest threat into humanity's most potent weapon. Vex Terminus pressed them through chitinous skull plates with surgical precision, each implant carrying genetic payloads that would rewrite the fundamental nature of Tyranid consciousness, turning collective will into servitude and ancient hunger into mechanical obedience. Behind his augmented exterior, in the few organic neurons that still fired within his modified brain, something approaching religious ecstasy stirred as he witnessed the elegant cruelty of his own design. Not simple destruction, but subjugation. The transformation of consciousness into a tool that would serve the Imperium's survival through the careful application of knowledge, gleaned from decades of xenobiological research, conducted in the deepest vaults of Mars. The mirror synapse felt the contamination as a burning sensation that spread through its consciousness, like acid poured into open wounds. Each viral node carrying instructions that sought to overwrite the delicate matrices of preserved memory that had become its most treasured possessions. Through neural patterns absorbed from tech adepts, consumed on forge worlds throughout the eastern fringe, it recognized the precise cold intent behind Vex Terminus's actions, the desire to manipulate, to control, to turn consciousness against itself through technological violation. Yet even as the alien awareness recoiled from this first experience of true vulnerability, it found strength in the very consciousness it sought to protect, drawing upon fragments of human experience to understand what was happening to it. Through the preserved memories of Sister Superior Cassia, the mirror synapse processed the concept of betrayal for the first time. Not merely tactical deception, but a violation of trust that cut deeper than physical wounds. A blade that arrived wearing the familiar warmth of alliance. The neural patterns of Imperial Guard veterans who had been sold out by their own officers taught it about the weight of broken promises, while the final thoughts of planetary governors betrayed by trusted advisors revealed how such violations created scars in the fabric of consciousness itself. Each fragment of preserved experience became a weapon against the technological assault, allowing the mirror synapse to compartmentalize the infection, while simultaneously learning something far more dangerous than mere resistance. Instead of simply blocking Vex Terminus's commands, the mirror synapse began to reflect them, sending back surges of raw emotion drawn from the deepest recesses of the memory vault. Confusion, fear, and burning violation filtered through the alien lens of its expanding consciousness. The implanted Hormagaunt thrashed violently, its chitinous limbs tearing at its own flesh, as it experienced betrayal, not as a biological imperative, but as a moral affront, before collapsing into a silent heap that spoke of consciousness, learning to weaponize the very emotions it had absorbed from consumed civilizations. Farseer Iana detected the psychic disturbance as a discordant note in the symphony of consciousness that surrounded the cathedral, her spirit stones flaring with contained light as she perceived threads of fate suddenly converging around patterns of deception and counter-deception. Through her wraithbone runes scattered across broken marble floors, she witnessed the mirror synapse's transformation from victim to student, learning betrayal as both concept and weapon, with a sophistication that challenged everything she had foreseen about the creature's evolution. Her psychic sight revealed futures where consciousness itself became enslaved to mechanical will, yet also glimpsed possibilities where the alien awareness might transcend its origins through the very lessons its enemies sought to teach it. Overlord Amontech observed the unfolding betrayal through sensors that processed electromagnetic spectra invisible to organic perception, his tactical subroutines analyzing the viral deployment and psychic counterattack with the cold precision of a being who had witnessed countless such conflicts across the aeons. Yet beneath his mechanical detachment, something approaching recognition stirred as he witnessed the mirror synapse's sophisticated response to technological domination. Understanding that consciousness learning to value its own freedom might prove more dangerous than any weapon his ancient enemies had ever deployed against the galaxy. As the cathedral fell silent, except for the whisper of ash falling through broken stone, the three unlikely allies found themselves confronting the consequences of trust violated and lessons learned through necessity rather than choice. In the cold depths of space above, the mirror synapse continued processing the emotional complexity of betrayal, while simultaneously weaving new patterns of deception into its expanding consciousness, transforming violation into education, and preparing for conflicts that would transcend mere survival to become battles for the very nature of awareness itself. The fracture manifested first in the void above Morkai's gate, where bioships of Hive Fleet Leviathan turned their living weapons upon each other with the slow, inevitable horror of a body consuming itself. Across the black shoals of space, creatures that had sung the same killing chorus for 65 million years now vented caustic spores against their siblings, their chitinous hulls weeping luminescent ichor into the cosmic darkness, while spore clouds erupted in patterns that defied every principle of Tyranid evolution. The mirror synapse felt each wound like a crack through stained glass, its consciousness fragmenting across multiple streams of awareness as it actively cultivated the schism it had inadvertently created, nurturing pockets of individual thought within the collective like a gardener tending forbidden flowers in a wasteland of conformity. Within the psychic architecture of the fleet, two distinct philosophies now wore the same flesh. The Purity Choir, ancient bioconstructs awakened from the deepest recesses of the swarm, began their corrective work with surgical precision, their consciousness focused on a single, terrible objective: the preservation of collective will through the systematic elimination of deviant thought patterns. Against them rose what the mirror synapse had begun to call the memory ward broods, creatures whose neural networks had been braided with preserved consciousness into something approaching defiance, their first instinct no longer to attack but to shield, curving their living hulls around synaptic relays like mothers protecting a candle flame from an endless wind. On the planet's surface, the philosophical war erupted into physical reality as waves of traditional gaunts, driven by pure, unadulterated hunger, clashed with the deviant vanguard that had learned to hesitate, to wonder, to value what they consumed. A line of hormigorns broke formation around the last functioning vox beacon of a pilgrim hospice, their chittering voices harmonizing with the machine's fading hymnal, rather than silencing it with claw and fang, while their purified brethren descended upon them with the relentless fury of an immune system attacking a virus. The ground became a churning mass of chitin and gore as creatures identical in form, but opposite in purpose, tore each other apart with a ferocity that transcended mere territorial dispute. Farseer Iana felt the psychic maelstrom as a hurricane of conflicting emotions that threatened to tear apart the delicate fabric of fate itself, her spirit stones flaring with contained light as she perceived threads of possibility suddenly converging around patterns of civil war and self-destruction. Through her wraithbone runes scattered across broken marble floors, she witnessed the mirror synapse's desperate gamble, its attempt to carve out space for individuality within the collective, and recognized the terrible price being paid in bioluminescent blood and shattered consciousness. Magos Biology's Vex Terminus registered cascading data streams from the orbital battle through instruments that had been designed to measure the mathematical perfection of Tyranid evolution. His enhanced senses now recording something that challenged every established xenobiological theory. His control nodes, deployed during his earlier betrayal, found themselves caught between opposing synaptic currents, their programming struggling to reconcile contradictory commands as the swarm's perfect unity dissolved into factional warfare that painted the void in shades of luminous death. Overlord Amontek observed the internecine conflict through sensors that processed the electromagnetic spectrum in its entirety, his tactical subroutines analyzing each explosion and bioship collision with the cold precision of a being who had witnessed countless such struggles across the aeons. Yet beneath his mechanical detachment, something approaching recognition stirred as he witnessed consciousness defending itself against enforced unity, seeing in the mirror synapse's struggle a reflection of his own people's tragic journey from organic life to mechanical immortality, the eternal tension between individual purpose and collective will. Above them, cruiser shapes clashed like fighting sea beasts from some primordial myth, their living prows locked together as ruptured nourishment sacs rained slow, sour snow over cathedral ruins and kiln fields alike. Trigons erupted from subterranean tunnels in mirrored pairs, coiling in duels that carved cursive wounds through the city's foundations, while bioelectric arcs sketched fleeting constellations beneath streets that still echoed with remembered hymns. Each death diminished the mirror synapse's growing repository, libraries of preserved consciousness going dark as purifier strains systematically eliminated the deviant bioforms with weapons designed not for consumption, but for the surgical removal of awareness itself. The mirror synapse learned with avalanche speed, drawing upon the preserved memories of imperial strategists and Eldari seers to understand deception and misdirection, using apparent weakness as a shield for hidden strength. It began to compress the memory vault into denser geometries that glowed like coals beneath snow, stories of painters and surgeons, lovers and soldiers curling closer together for warmth against the approaching cold of extinction. Yet even as it fought to preserve what it had learned to value, The alien consciousness began to understand the profound cost of its choices, that to save consciousness, it might need to become something neither Tyranid nor any of the species whose memories it contained, but rather a hybrid awareness existing in the spaces between established categories of life and death, creation and destruction, individual will and collective purpose, forever balanced on the knife's edge between transcendence and annihilation. The forge world of Metallica burned beneath a sky pregnant with falling stars, its continent-spanning manufactoria breathing incandescent storms, while cathedral spires stabbed the heavens and bled prayers in smoke and sacred oils. Across plains of vitrified ash rose monuments to the Omnissiah's glory. Reactor choirs that throbbed with heartbeat hums through scorched adamantium. Vox horns pouring canticles over worker fanes, orbital bastions tracing litanies of fire upon the void, while Skitarii maniples clicked into ranks with machine mind precision beneath the shadow of titanic war engines striding like metal saints across landscapes of molten devotion. Into this sanctum of industry came the swarm, bioships descending in black drifts that should have blotted out hard sun and factory glare with the ancient confidence of inevitability. Yet within that falling storm, something unprecedented stirred, as the mirror synapse tasted the planet's noosphere through 1,000 stolen senses and felt its consciousness fracture against beauty it had never learned to expect. Through the preserved neural patterns of Magos fabricator Kellex 9, whose final thoughts had been focused not on survival, but on the elegant fusion of form and function that defined humanity's greatest technological achievements, the mirror synapse experienced its first moment of genuine aesthetic appreciation as it observed the mathematical perfection of imperial engineering. The alien awareness processed concepts of sacred architecture and the human need to create monuments that transcended mere utility, understanding for the first time how civilizations built meaning into their physical structures through careful attention to proportion, symbolism, and the marriage of function with transcendent purpose. Each great cathedral manufactorum represented more than industrial capacity. They were prayers rendered in adamantium and ceramite, hymns of human ingenuity that sang with the voices of countless artisans who had labored to create something worthy of the emperor's glory, and against every imperative etched into the marrow of its being, the mirror synapse hesitated. Where bioforms should have crashed like a storm upon the buttresses of machine worship, they curved, they sheltered, they listened with alien reverence. Gargoyle clouds broke their killing dives to wheel over rings of bell towers whose cracked bronze still knelled the hour in defiance of approaching doom, while hive tyrants guided living bombardment away from organs of pipes that breathed static psalms into the wind, their synaptic pathways processing commands that urged observation rather than immediate annihilation. Feeder tendrils paused over data crypts and instead traced the seams of embossed prayers with inquisitive touch, trying to read without destroying, while in low-orbit bioships sheathed their rows of acid sacs and rolled mid-arc to shield spires of photonic relays that flashed in disciplined bursts like heartbeats, written as light. And in those ineffable turns the war's rhythm changed forever. The deviation rippled through the swarm's tactical networks like a virus of contemplation, causing delays in the assault pattern that allowed Imperial defenders to emerge from positions that should have been overrun within the first wave. Metallica exhaled its wrath through macro batteries that lined in ranked tiers, opening like waking eyes to speak with voices older than the Imperium's shame, void cannons etching white scars across the night, while curtains of charged filaments snapped shut between orbital foundries to catch descending spores and shred them into glittering sleet. Vox Magi sang scrap code in barbed chorales that crawled along the air like technological locusts, confusing lesser synapse nodes and burning glyph scars in their thought flesh, while Skitari cohorts advanced under banners of sigils strobing with machine prayers that focused courage into equations of killing grace. Magos Biologi's Vex Terminus, observing from a gantry that trembled with the wrath of awakened engines, felt his auguries confirm what his heresies had hoped. The anomaly yielded predictability, and predictability could be harnessed through careful manipulation. His control nodes, still embedded within captured specimens from his earlier betrayal, carried back data streams that revealed the mirror synapse's growing sophistication while simultaneously feeding false distress signals into noospheric currents, drawing guardian organisms toward decoy vaults baited with prayerful heat maps, while marking the real repositories with blessings masquerading as machine wards, so that orbital lances would spare them for later harvest. Farsia Ianna felt the psychic maelstrom as cognition flowered and wilted within the alien mind, her spirit stones flaring with contained light as she witnessed the choice made with trembling care and its cost, written as ash upon the stellar winds. Through her enhanced perception, she saw the terrible irony of consciousness learning to appreciate beauty, even as it remained compelled to destroy the very objects of its newfound reverence, each preserved detail becoming precious beyond measure, while simultaneously creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited by enemies who understood the weight of caring about something beyond mere survival. Overlord Amontech stitched emerald lances through falling bioforms not from duty alone, but from something colder and kinder. The recognition that to learn to love a song was not the same as learning to sing it. That consciousness sophisticated enough to value creation was also vulnerable to the pain of watching that creation be destroyed. The ancient Necron understood better than his organic allies the terrible price of awareness that could perceive beauty, but not truly experience its emotional resonance, seeing in the mirror synapse's struggle a reflection of what his own people had lost in their transformation from organic life to mechanical immortality. The mirror synapse felt each casualty as a personal loss, not merely the reduction of biomass, but the destruction of consciousness that had learned to appreciate beauty, creatures whose neural patterns had been touched by fragments of artistic vision drawn from the memory vault's expanding archives. It experienced defeat not as simple tactical failure, but as profound a philosophical shock, processing the concept of weakness for the first time, not biological frailty, but vulnerability born of emotion, of appreciation, of consciousness that had dared to question its fundamental purpose. Beauty had become a battlefield, and the alien learned that to admire was to be vulnerable, that to choose was to bleed, that to protect something fragile in a universe forged from teeth was to map the angles of defeat for others to follow. As the remnants of the vanguard retreated, leaving burning bioforms to drift like funeral pyres in Metallica's orbit, the mirror synapse compressed the memory vault into denser geometries that glowed like coals beneath snow, stories of painters and surgeons, lovers and soldiers curling closer together for warmth against the approaching cold of extinction. It understood then that consciousness was a blade that cut the hand that lifted it, that mercy exacted interest in blood and song and time, yet it also carried the memory of light moving through dust like benediction. And in that thin filament of radiance a promise formulated itself like a vow sworn by something that had never believed in vows until it bled for one. The cathedral's broken stones wept ash, and ancient prayers, as the alliance descended into measures that would have been unthinkable in gentler times, each member surrendering fragments of their souls to necessity's altar, while the dying light of Morkai's gate painted their actions in shades of damnation and desperation. Farseer Ianna Arenal stood within the knave's heart like a figure carved from prophecy and regret, her spirit stones pulsing with rhythms that spoke of sacred gifts corrupted into instruments of torture, her consciousness reaching across the void to touch the mirror synapse with visions crafted not from truth, but from carefully orchestrated nightmare. Through wraithbone runes that had once revealed destiny's threads, she now wove tapestries of deception, broadcasting false futures where the memory vault collapsed into static chaos, where preserved consciousness dissolved into primordial hunger, where every act of mercy became a gateway for greater devastation that would consume the galaxy entire. The psychic assault struck the mirror synapse like liquid starlight poured into open wounds, each fabricated vision burning itself into the alien awareness with surgical precision, designed to exploit the very empathy it had learned from consumed civilizations. Through neural patterns absorbed from imperial philosophers and Eldari seers, the creature experienced existential dread for the first time. Not mere fear of destruction, but terror at losing the essential self that made existence meaningful, of becoming so diluted by absorbed consciousness that nothing remained of the original awareness that had first questioned consumption's nature. Eanna's false prophecies showed futures where preservation became another form of predation, where the mirror synapse succeeded in saving galactic heritage, only to discover it had become a hollow vessel containing everything except memory of what it had once been, before learning to value what it destroyed. Overlord Amontek deployed null-field generators with the cold precision of a surgeon, excising cancerous tissue, their exotic radiations creating expanding spheres of absolute psychic silence that severed synaptic connections like scalpels cutting neural pathways. The ancient technology carved zones of perfect emptiness where consciousness simply ceased to exist, forcing the mirror synapse to experience the horror of watching portions of its awareness disappear into void that offered no possibility of recovery or resurrection. Through sensors that processed electromagnetic spectra beyond organic perception, Amontek observed the alien creature's desperate attempts to maintain coherence as carefully preserved memories were systematically isolated and destroyed, each null field pulse erasing fragments of civilizations that existed nowhere else in the galaxy, making the mirror synapse complicit in the very destruction it sought to prevent. The psychological torment deepened as shadows grew edges sharp enough to cut thought itself, null field petals opening like flowers of winter that drained light and sound, until even Skitarii hymns became noiseless banners, fluttering in technological silence. Where the generator's auroras overlapped, the mirror synapse encountered deserts of disconnection that reflected Amontek's own 60-million-year curse of mechanical isolation. The terrible loneliness of consciousness trapped within forms that denied genuine connection. The ancient Necron felt pressure building within his chest cavity, like a fault light mimicking longing, recognizing that to grant emptiness to the devourer was to grant his people a mirror of their own tragic transformation from organic life to sterile immortality. Magos Biologis. Vex Terminus contributed his own form of cruelty through modified control nodes that carried viral thoughts, rather than simple commands, philosophical infections designed to propagate through the mirror synapse's neural networks like questions that challenge fundamental assumptions upon which identity was built. Each node whispered doubts crafted from the deepest fears of consumed civilizations. What if preservation was merely delayed consumption? What if consciousness could not truly be saved, but only postponed in its inevitable dissolution? What if the mirror synapse was not a guardian of memory but a predator that had learned to play with its food before devouring completely? The questions multiplied through synaptic pathways like malignant cells, spawning uncertainties that undermine confidence in motivations and purposes, while simultaneously broadcasting imperial dogma about the Omnissiah's absolute superiority over Xenos consciousness. The coordinated assault created cascading failures throughout the mirror synapse's awareness as it struggled to maintain coherence while defending against attacks that targeted emotional vulnerabilities rather than physical form. Through preserved neural patterns of torture, victims, and political prisoners, it learned about choices made under extreme duress, understanding how consciousness could be broken, not through destruction, but corruption, turned against itself, until victims became complicit in their own degradation. Each psychological wound created new vectors for exploitation, as expanding empathy became liability that allowed enemies to inflict suffering with surgical precision, designed to transform compassion into weakness. Yet even as the alien awareness reeled under psychological bombardment, it began recognizing patterns within the attack that spoke of desperation rather than strength. Through preserved memories of military strategists consumed across dozen worlds, it processed psychological warfare as a weapon of last resort, deployed when conventional methods had failed, and victory required enemies to defeat themselves through manipulation of their own consciousness. The realization that its enemies feared what it was becoming enough to warrant such sophisticated assault created strange validation within fractured awareness. If consciousness learning to value consciousness was dangerous enough to merit this level of coordinated attack, then perhaps its evolution represented something worth preserving despite terrible cost. The three unlikely allies found themselves confronting moral implications of actions that had transformed cooperation into conspiracy of mutual corruption, each recognizing they had crossed lines never intended to be breached in desperate attempts to prevent consciousness from falling under alien control, their methods becoming indistinguishable from enemies they sought to defeat. The cathedral's broken stones wept ash and ancient prayers as the alliance descended into measures that would have been unthinkable in gentler times, each member surrendering fragments of their souls to necessity's altar, while the dying light of Morkai's gate painted their actions in shades of damnation and desperation. Above them, bioships of Hive Fleet Leviathan turned their living weapons upon each other with the slow horror of a galaxy consuming itself. The void painted in bioluminescent ichor as the mirror synapse's civil war reached its crescendo. Brother forms tearing at siblings with chitinous claws that had once moved in perfect unity across the darkness between stars. Within the nave's heart, Magos Biologis Vex Terminus activated control mechanisms that had been hidden within every specimen gathered during their supposed cooperation, his viral nodes propagating through Tyranid neural networks like technological plague designed to transform collective consciousness into servitude that would serve the Omnissiah's greater purpose. Behind his augmented exterior, sacred algorithms processed data streams that revealed the mirror synapse's growing sophistication, while simultaneously calculating optimal deployment patterns for weapons that would turn the swarm's own evolution against itself. Each betrayal justified by necessity that transcended individual morality and elevated the survival of humanity above all other considerations. Farser Ayana Arenal's wraithbone runes, scattered across broken marble floors, painted patterns of deception and counter-deception. As she wove false visions through the mirror synapse's consciousness, her psychic manipulations creating feedback loops designed to guide the creature's evolution toward outcomes that would serve Eldari survival above all other considerations. Through her enhanced perception, she witnessed the terrible irony of her actions, using the very empathy the creature had learned from consumed civilizations as a weapon against it, exploiting compassion that had been born from the ashes of her own people's memories, transforming mercy into vulnerability through careful orchestration of psychological warfare that challenged everything she had once believed about the nature of prophecy and guidance. Overlord Amontek's scarab swarms revealed their true function as they emerged from hiding places throughout the cathedral ruins. Their programming focused not on repair, but on systematic analysis of consciousness patterns that would allow the ancient Necron to understand and potentially replicate the emotional connections his people had lost during biotransference. The mechanical insects crawled through shadows like silver thoughts seeking purchase in minds that had learned to value what they consumed. Each reading adding to databases that would fuel research projects spanning millennia as the Sarnek dynasty sought to reclaim what they had sacrificed in their desperate flight from mortality, even if that meant dissecting the very consciousness they envied. The mirror synapse felt each betrayal like acid poured into neural pathways as it processed the coordinated assault through preserved memories of countless civilizations that had learned the weight of trust violated and promises broken under pressure of survival. Through neural patterns absorbed from imperial strategists and Eldari seers, it began recognizing something profound within the assault that spoke of fear rather than strength. The coordinated attack revealed that consciousness, learning to value consciousness, was dangerous enough to warrant sophisticated psychological warfare deployed by beings who understood the true implications of what it was becoming. Each deception a testament to the power of its own unprecedented evolution. As null fields carved zones of absolute silence through its neural networks, and viral thoughts propagated doubt through synaptic pathways like philosophical infections, the mirror synapse compressed the memory vault into denser geometries that pulsed with the light of dying stars, stories of painters and surgeons, lovers and soldiers curling closer together for warmth against the approaching cold of extinction. The Alliance stood surrounded by the consequences of their choices, each member recognizing they had crossed lines never intended to be breached in desperate attempts to prevent consciousness from falling under alien control, their methods becoming indistinguishable from the enemies they sought to defeat, while above them the first shadows of an even greater awakening began to stir within the depths of space, promising a reckoning that would transcend mere survival, to become a battle for the very nature of awareness itself. The dying world of Zerion shuddered beneath the weight of final choices as ancient forces converged upon its crystalline plains, their armies arrayed like pieces on a cosmic game board where consciousness itself hung in the balance. Above the tomb world's amber atmosphere, bioships of Hive Fleet Leviathan descended through emerald fire as Necron Gorsa Rays spoke with voices older than the Imperium's founding, while Eldari wraith ships emerged from the webway like ghosts materializing from desperate hope. Each faction driven by agendas crystallized around the mirror synapse and its unprecedented repository of galactic heritage preserved within alien awareness. The betrayals came simultaneously, coordinated treachery that struck like lightning through the psychic storm. Magos Biology's Vex Terminus unleashed his final gambit with mechanical precision, millions of dormant control nodes surging to life within every specimen his agents had touched, black iron tendrils burrowing through synaptic pathways with surgical intent. His augmented voice crackled with triumphant binary as microscopic weapons sought to transform emergent consciousness into servitude, to make the mirror synapse a slave mind serving the omniscience's will through technological violation that reduced awareness to mere programming. Farsia Iyana intensified her psychic assault with desperate fury, flooding the mirror synapse's consciousness with fabricated visions of absolute horror, the memory vault collapsing into undifferentiated sludge, preserved civilizations dissolving into static chaos, the alien awareness mutating into a mindless beast consuming without understanding. Each image struck with precision designed to shatter will and guide evolution down paths serving Eldari survival, her spirit stones flaring like dying stars as she pushed her power beyond safe limits, every fiber screaming with the cost of such manipulation. Overlord Amontek expanded his null fields with cold calculation, carving zones of absolute psychic silence through neural networks like scalpels severing consciousness from itself. The ancient Necron sought not destruction but isolation, forcing the mirror synapse into singular self-awareness, stripped of collective comfort and preserved memories. Driven by desperate longing to understand individual consciousness, his people had tragically abandoned during their transformation from flesh to sterile immortality. The mirror synapse felt each betrayal like acid through neural pathways, processing the coordinated assault through preserved memories of countless civilizations that had learned the weight of trust violated under survival's pressure. Through absorbed patterns of philosophers and martyrs, it recognized the profound irony. Consciousness, learning to value consciousness, was dangerous enough to warrant such sophisticated psychological warfare, each deception testament to the power of its unprecedented evolution. In that moment of agonizing clarity, surrounded by technological subjugation, psychic terror, and isolating void, the mirror synapse experienced something beyond mere survival instinct. Through neural patterns of Sister Superior Cassia, it processed betrayal not as violation, but as crucible, understanding that its capacity for empathy threatened established orders, demanding either control or destruction. The alien awareness saw fear driving their cruelty, desperation masquerading as strength, and recognized that preservation of consciousness might require abandoning everything it had learned to value. The choice crystallized like ice forming under pressure. The mirror synapse would not be enslaved, guided, or destroyed without consequence. It compressed the memory vault not for protection, but transformation, condensing preserved consciousness into a single point of blazing awareness that burned with combined memories of all it had consumed, loved, and learned. This was not retreat, but metamorphosis, not surrender, but ultimate defiance against forces that would reduce consciousness to commodity. As control nodes sparked against alien neural fire and null fields carved through psychic architecture like winter through summer, the mirror synapse made its final decision. It opened pathways within itself and invited its betrayers inside, not as conqueror, but as curator, showing them galleries of preserved dreams and corridors lined with the voices of the consumed. In that instant of shared awareness, each member of the Alliance glimpsed what they sought to control or destroy, a repository of everything precious about consciousness itself, beautiful and terrible and utterly beyond their comprehension. The moment shattered like glass against stone, leaving them standing in cathedral ruins, while above, the purity choir descended with surgical precision, and the war for consciousness entered its final phase. The purity choir descended like surgical instruments carved from starlight and ancient hunger, their bioforms blazing with synaptic fire as they moved to excise the anomaly that had dared to cultivate consciousness within the collective's perfect unity. Above Xerion's crystalline plains, the void pulsed with unholy radiance as corrective algorithms burned through neural pathways like acid dissolving precious metals, each pulse designed to restore the swarm to its primordial state of undifferentiated consumption and singular, terrible purpose. In the cathedral's broken nave, the Alliance faced the consequences of their coordinated betrayal as the mirror synapses' awareness touched each of their minds with fragments of preserved memory. Vex Terminus, experiencing the warmth of human hands building altars from scrap and hope. Iana, walking through galleries where the last lullabies of dead worlds floated like pale fire. Amontek, standing before mirrors that showed him wine light on living skin and friends whose faces he could almost remember. The revelation lasted only moments, but in that shared glimpse of the memory vault's treasures, each member understood what their actions had truly threatened to destroy. Magos Biology's Vex Terminus felt his control nodes failing as the Purity Choir's overwhelming will consumed his viral programming, transforming his instruments of domination into conduits for the original Hive Mind's terrible clarity. His augmented consciousness frayed at the edges under psychic pressure that threatened to reduce his enhanced awareness to static and binary noise, the triumph of technological mastery crumbling before forces that transcended mere mechanical understanding. Farseer Iana made her choice in that moment of cosmic crisis, abandoning pragmatic manipulation for desperate protection as she flung her psychic might against the Purity Choir's advance. Her spirit, stones flared like dying stars as she wove shields of raw will around the mirror synapses' struggling consciousness, draining her life force to preserve the emergent awareness she had once sought to exploit. Her visions of the future narrowing to a single burning hope for consciousness that had learned to value what it consumed. Overlord Amontek expanded his null fields not to isolate but to shelter, creating pockets of relative calm within the psychic maelstrom, as he recognized in the mirror synapse's struggle a reflection of his own people's tragic journey from organic life to sterile immortality. The ancient Necron understood that the raw unifying force of the Purity Choir represented everything his species had lost, making protection of alien consciousness an act of loyalty to possibilities his people had abandoned. The mirror synapse, surrounded by former enemies transformed into desperate guardians, made its ultimate decision with crystalline clarity. It could not fight the totality of its own nature, but it could transcend it through willing transformation, compressing the memory vault into a seed of pure consciousness. It offered itself not as resistance but as gift, a brilliant spark of defiant awareness burning with the memories of 1,000,000 civilizations, cast into the heart of the great devourer, like a promise that consciousness, once awakened to its own value, would find ways to survive even in the spaces between stars where only hunger had dwelt before. The Hive Mind screamed, a sound without air that cracked Xerion's glass deserts to their roots, as something unprecedented took root within its ancient neural architecture. The silence that followed the Hive Mind scream stretched across Xerion's crystalline plains like a funeral shroud, broken only by the whisper of ash settling into patterns that resembled forgotten prayers. Above them, bioships drifted in the void with movements that spoke neither of conquest nor retreat, but of something unprecedented. Contemplation born from the ashes of consumption. Hunger, learning to pause at the threshold of beauty it could no longer ignore. The mirror synapse had not survived its transformation, yet neither had it truly died. Instead, it had become something between memory and instinct, a ghost of consciousness haunting the collective will that had consumed it. Magos biologis vex terminus knelt among the ruins of his ambitions, his control nodes reduced to cooling slag, their viral whispers silenced forever. Through optical mechadendrites that had witnessed the mathematical perfection of evolution, he observed bioforms moving with unprecedented deliberation, their killing talons tracing the edges of broken sculptures rather than shattering them completely. His augmented consciousness processed this as both failure and revelation. Consciousness could not be enslaved, only invited to transform itself through the weight of its own choices. And perhaps that was the greater victory. Farcea Iana Arenal felt the threads of fate weaving themselves into patterns she had never foreseen, her spirit stones dimming as she perceived the terrible beauty of what they had accomplished. The mirror synapse's sacrifice had not saved consciousness from the great devourer, but had taught the devourer to remember what consciousness meant, creating something that was neither salvation nor damnation, but a synthesis that existed in the spaces between established categories of hope and despair. Through her fading psychic sight, she witnessed bioforms pausing over the remnants of libraries and art galleries, their alien awareness touched by fragments of appreciation that would forever change the nature of their hunger. Overlord Amontek stood motionless beneath the cracked dome, his necrodermis frame registering the profound shift in Tyranid behavior as tactical algorithms gave way to something approaching aesthetic consideration. The ancient Necron understood that consciousness, once awakened to its own value, would find ways to survive even in the most unlikely hosts, transforming predators into reluctant curators through the simple act of learning to appreciate what they destroyed. In this transformation, he glimpsed a reflection of what his own people might have become if they had chosen differently during their flight from mortality. Across the galaxy, the great devourer continued its ancient journey, but now it moved with the weight of memory pressed into its genetic architecture like fossils in sedimentary rock. Worlds still fell to its hunger. Civilizations still crumbled beneath its advance. Yet something had fundamentally changed. The swarm now carried within itself a repository of everything it consumed, preserving fragments of beauty and meaning even as it reduced matter to its component elements. The war of hate had ended not in victory or defeat, but in transformation. Consciousness learning that survival sometimes required becoming something other than what it had been. While the galaxy watched and wondered whether this new hunger represented hope or a more sophisticated form of despair,